All right, well, here we are on Monday evening, and every day it looks like we're getting ready to get a big, healthy rain, and then it doesn't happen. I can remember when I was a boy, my uncle would get me up at this time of year, July and August, and a great uncle, and he had a pepper patch, and I had to go pick peppers. I hated doing that. He paid me, but I liked that, but I didn't like picking the peppers. And he had a huge one, a couple, 3 acres, and me and him and another man would go down there. And I remember on these early mornings, you'd be out there and I'd be picking the peppers, and I'd look up and that sky'd get black and you'd hear the thunder and lightning. I think, okay, I'm getting ready to go home. And it never would rain. It just, and I was always thinking, okay, what's going on? And that's what I thought of that today, because at one point it darkened here really bad, and it never did come anything. I guess it's spotty. And when I found out about spotty rain then, I thought, well, why don't it spot right over this pepper patch? That would be a great place for it to rain. Well, if you've got your Bibles, go ahead and take and turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 8.
Verse 3.
And, well, we're getting ready to... We've kind of covered the first 8 verses. But now we're going into a generic kind of discussion and be pulling some things from 8 and 9 in the next couple of lessons, because while we've looked at some principles for giving in the past lessons, I want to look at the view of money. All right, how should we just view our money? But before I do anything, Ann had asked for me to discuss a little more on the subject of sacrificial giving. And I did not do a very good job of explaining that, because I was just kind of skimming across the top. And so after you asked for that, I did some research. And I tell you what, it's really sad, because when I went to the internet, that's where I started before I went to my books. I thought, well, maybe there'll be some nice articles. Most of the articles on the internet was how to give sacrificially so you can be prosperous. That was what all the articles had to deal with, so I had to abandon any help from the internet on that. But sacrificial anything, I guess we just need to look at the word sacrifice and what constitutes a sacrifice, because sacrifices are things that are offered. And in the Greek, the word for offering means to give. And, in this particular instance, we're talking about making a sacrifice or giving to God. So it's much broader than just money, okay? And I think that where the confusion comes up, and where I think back on my comments that perhaps I was not as clear as I should have been, is that when we deal with sacrificial giving, the first thing you need to get out of your mind is amount. Okay? The amount has nothing to do with whether it's sacrificial or not. Okay? So we have to start from the heart. And so in a nutshell, going all the way back to the book of Genesis, where we read of the first sacrifice being given by Abel and Cain. And I think that I have missed the point all along. That was a free will sacrifice, no requirement there. And the reason I say there's no requirement there is simply because God never said anything about it anywhere. When God requires something, He says, do this, and gives you the specific instructions of how it is that you are to do this. And so in that instance, I had always taken that God would not accept nothing but a blood sacrifice, because that's what Abel did. And so what gets all the attention in the Cain and Abel story is that Abel offered grain. And so I've always taught and I've always preached that what was wrong with Cable was Cable. I just took Cain and Abel and combined them. Cable. They had a nephew named Cable. I was joking. But Cain offered this sacrifice of grain, and so it was the wrong thing that God was really looking at. I've kind of changed on that because I have to eat crow. God does accept grain sacrifices. All you got to do is move into Leviticus and, Deuteronomy, and they did offer their grain unto God, even 10% of it when they gave their tithe as far as taxation was concerned. And so that was offered. So I think that the thing that we have to look at then goes back again to the heart. Why were they offering what they offered? And basically, there's just two approaches to this. There is the external. All right, I'll go through the motion, no connection with what's going on in my heart. And then there is the internal, where I do so out of thankfulness and gratitude for God. So really, when you look at your giving, be it your time, your talent, your money, go to your motive. Is it just like, you know as well as I do, that if you're not careful, things that become habit become things that, yes, they become ritual. They become the end in of themselves. Long as we do this, then we're okay. How many times have you, as in the Church of Christ, all of us, heard about the 5 acts of worship? 5 items of worship. And I noticed when COVID happened, and with all of the scrambling around at the first as to how are we going to do this and still honor God, okay? How are we going to arrange things? The main thing I always heard, and everybody just go, we got to get them 5 things done. Okay, so back to almost what I call the checklist. Saying check. And it's a shame, but we tried to do what we could do as quick as we could and get out there and feel like we done good. I mean, not just am I getting on churches? Yes. Okay, let's just go ahead and say I am. That way you don't have to worry about where I'm coming from. But if a church gets up and says, okay, we'll sing one song, one verse of one song, what are they telling you? Is that song coming from a sense of obligation or a sense of gratitude and thankfulness for the blessings that God gave? It appears to come from obligation. Now, there may be some hearts that are in the audience who are right with God and sing that in spirit and understanding. Or, we've got to get the Lord's Supper in here somewhere, and we'll just read 3 scriptures and that'll be all we'll do. And so you're in and out in 10 minutes, and everybody feels like we've really worshiped God.
Turning worship into a sermonette.
Yeah, and so to me that becomes what I call the external. That is not acceptable. And as you go through the sacrificial system of the Old Testament, you will see that God does not accept those things. In fact, let me give you an example, and I'm going to tell you the Church of Christ spin that this boy here taught for years. But I want you to notice what the real spin is, what the real problem was. Leviticus chapter 10. And here we are at the sacrifice that's offered by Nadab and Abihu. And all of us have heard this 1,000 times, I'm sure. Now, Nadab and Abihu, verse 1, the sons of Aaron took their respective fire pans, and after putting fire in them, placed incense on it, and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. And fire came out from the presence of the Lord, and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. All right, stop right there. Most of the time when I preached on this, or heard sermons on this, that's as far as we went in the text. Which then, the point was made that the reason they got burned up was because they had offered strange fire, whatever in the world that might mean. Okay, I've heard 1,000 different takes on strange fire. And that they got burnt up because their fire wasn't right. And thus, that kind of backs up, well, we got to make sure we got the 5 things. Make sure you're doing all the right things. You see what I'm saying? That's the point we wanted to make with that. And that all sounded good, and people would say, amen, I'm glad I'm not like Nadab and Abihu. My fire's always right. Okay? Now, that if we only had those 2 verses, I'd say we're okay. But there's more to the story. Okay? And what we find is that apparently Aaron goes to Moses. It's implied, I think, in the passage. Or Moses comes to Aaron, because these were Aaron's son. And you know, you know how we humans are. You know what? You know, Moses, you're the one who talks to God. He killed my boys. He killed my boys. Well, what's up? You know, you could just hear the grief and see it. And Aaron's not even allowed to mourn for them. Okay? But Moses intercedes and tells Aaron, he says, this is what the Lord spoke. See, the Lord's already told me, Aaron, what the problem was. By those who come near me, I must have right fire. Is that what that says?
I must be regarded as holy.
Okay. And before all the people, I will be what?
Glorified.
The recognition of God's holiness and honoring Him, an act of the heart. You see, you get the heart right, the external will take care of itself. See, we were looking at the strange fire as the sum of it. The strange fire was the symptom of Nadab and Abihu. The real problem Nadab and Abihu had was what? A heart issue. They did not regard God as holy. They did not consider Him worthy to be honored. And that manifested itself in the offering of strange fire. All right, you know, same thing with Adam and Eve when the sin occurred in the garden. I mean, you know, think about it. Eating a piece of fruit, I don't think there was anything magical in the fruit. I think that the fruit was the dividing line between, are you going to honor me in your heart and do what I say or not? You know, it wasn't bad fruit. And you know, and we don't need to get up and preach lessons on the fruit they ate. You know, the thing is, what was going on within the hearts? One was deceived, and one went along with that deception for whatever reason.
They disobeyed God.
Yeah, there's the issue. They was not honoring God by doing what it was He said. So see, when you start looking at it this way, the heart becomes a primary concern. And one of the things that you'll find is that God is merciful when the externals are not correct if the internals are. Did you know that? All throughout the Old Testament you see this. Where, you know, you didn't see this blazing anger, fire rolling down from heaven when the midwives in Moses, when Moses was a little boy, a baby, you remember? They had been told to what? Kill all the young men. And they lied, because the midwives said to Pharaoh, when he asked them about it, they said, these women are stocky and healthy. The Hebrews are much stronger than the Egyptian women, and they have them before we even get there to deliver them. Well, that wasn't exactly so. And God, it says, because they were protecting these kids, honored these women, the midwives, and blessed them. You know, so externally, right? But internally, their motive was right. David, when he ate the shewbread, you remember that? When he was running from his enemies and he comes by the temple, and that bread was set out there for the priests, and David and them were hungry. And they asked the high priest, may we eat of that? Now, God killed other kings for taking on priestly roles when they should not have. But in this particular instance, the high priest says, sure, take them and eat them. And David and his men ate those loaves of bread, and God did not destroy them. Again, David's heart was a heart after God's own heart, right? So, don't use that to justify doing wrong. Say, I'm going to go commit adultery, but my heart's right in it. No, that's not what we're saying. But do what? Yes. Did you say Rahab? Yes, yeah, Rahab. She was a harlot, and she hid the spies of God because she believed in God, had faith in God. She said, "We've heard what you people did to the Egyptians." She says, "I believe it. I'm not, I don't want me and my family to become a victim of this. So come in here. And all I ask is when you come to destroy the city, you remember me and my family and spare us." And they said, "Tie a scarlet ribbon right in the window so we'll know it's you." And they did. And then they took her and her family with them back to Israel. And she ends up in the genealogy of Jesus. I mean, imagine that. And this prostitute, this woman of the night, gets in the Hall of Fame of the Faithful in Hebrews chapter 11. So, anyway, back to sacrificial giving, or the giving of any sacrifice. It begins with the heart, motivated by a sense of appreciation and gratitude for God. Therefore, amount-wise, okay, he's not going to specify. Does that make sense? He's not going. That's why we don't have a set amount that he says that you must do. Now, someone might say, but there has to be a cost to the giver, right? And there does. There is. But in reality, every gift I give to God is a cost to me of some degree. Not all to the same amount of degree. Amen. But you know what I'm saying? If I give $5, that's $5 I could have used on myself somewhere. Right? If I earned that $5, I think I left the impression you had to just be bankrupt and then give more. That's not what I meant. What I intended to say, that's what I'm saying now, so erase the other night. $5, I've chosen with that $5 gift, to give, rather than spend it on myself. I laid it aside to give to the Lord. Okay? And the more thankful and generous you are, the bigger that gift will be, right? But that's a matter of your heart and God's, and not ours. Is that making sense, Ann?
Yeah, but in order to be considered sacrificial, does it have to be giving that affects your comfort level?
Not necessarily. Well, it depends on what. To some degree, yes. But the degree to which it affects your comfort level. A $5 gift, it will affect my comfort level, not much. Because there's probably a Coke and a candy bar I won't buy because of that. You see what I'm saying? Where otherwise, because I can start out in the morning with a $20 bill in my pocket and think I don't have to spend anything. I get back in the afternoon, I ain't got nothing left. So somehow I find a way to spend that. I guess the thing that I wasn't clear on, even in my own thinking till I looked at this, no, it doesn't have to be a comfort level where I'm going to have to hurt. You know what I'm saying? Now, there are times, however, when that is done. The Macedonians, their comfort level, they exceeded their comfort level. They gave beyond their ability. I gave the example the other day of a family that gave me $300 to send to Belize that I know struggles. They had laid that up. Now, could they have used that themselves for something needed, actually? Kids, clothes for the kids, back to school supplies, food, yes, because they really struggle. So that is a really big sacrifice. But it's not, take for example, the illustration in the scripture was when David said, "Should I offer God that which costs me nothing?" David had the money to buy that land and to buy those oxen. He was king of Israel. You know what I'm saying? So he wasn't saying, I have no money, and I'll have to rake this together, and this is really going to hurt. What he was saying was, I can't offer that. That's yours. You see what I'm saying? And this is my offering to God. because when I'm talking about the instance where David goes to the threshing floor and they bring the Ark of the Covenant out, and David says we need to mark this place as holy ground, build an altar, make a sacrifice, and the guy says, "Hey, take my threshing floor. I'll give you the ground. I got a yoke of oxen over here. We'll slaughter them." And David says, "Shall I offer the Lord that cost me nothing? This is my sacrifice, and if I can't make a sacrifice using your stuff." That would be like if I come in here and walk over to Sarge and say, "Here, well, I don't know, that could even get technical there, but if I give," Sarge always gets nervous when I start to use him as an example.
Look, y'all.
But
I still ain't got my favorite.
yeah, you did. You got 3 times what you got last year.
That's right.
But I guess what I'm saying is I can't make a sacrifice for you. I can't give for you. You can't give for me. I have to give for myself. And I think that's one of the things that we'll see kind of in the next 2 or 3 lessons where we start talking about a gauge of your spiritual growth. Okay, the size is going to reflect what's in your heart. Who was it? Mary? You remember over in John when she took the little bottle of perfume
Right.
that was worth a year's
Wages.
salary, and she broke it and poured it on Jesus' feet. Now, that didn't say that Mary was poor. Apparently she wasn't. She's been able to buy that, but that was something of great value that she could have used probably all year long, on herself, because that was what women did with those perfumes in those days, just like today. And but she chose not to use it and to give it all at that time. And remember, there were those around saying, "What are you doing that for? You could have sold all that and gave it to the poor." And Jesus told them, "Leave her alone." He said, "Leave her alone." He said, "The poor, if you're really concerned about the poor, you don't got to look far to find them. If that's where your heart really is, you got a chance every day. Help somebody that's poor." Go ahead.
Well, as Christians, we're obligated to take care of ourselves.
Right.
So
Yeah.
if we give beyond way beyond our comfort,
Our means, right.
Somebody's going to have to
take care of us, right? And the Bible, that's a good valid point, because in 1 Timothy we're told not to burden the church. When he was talking about take care of the widows, he gave an age, and he says because otherwise they're young enough to marry again and be taken care of in that way. And if they have children, let their children take care of them first. He says so that the church of the Lord be not burdened. Because there's other things that we can take care of. So very excellent point. Yeah, that's really good. So and he says in that same Timothy, if you don't provide for your own, you are worse than an infidel. You're like an unbeliever because you're not taking care of things at home. So I don't think, but there's always been in the minds of a lot of Christians that somehow, and that's going to come out in our studies in the next couple of weeks, that somehow to have riches is wrong. And it's never been wrong to be rich. It is the heart attitude toward the riches that determines the rightness or wrongness. Okay, that's the thing. And we should never feel guilty for having been blessed by the Lord with material goods. Yes, there are people who abuse that. Yes, there are people who don't appreciate it. Yes, there are that. But we can't worry about them. We got to think of ourselves. And I've got one lesson, because I've been working on them, where we talk about all the things that God has given us to enjoy. That's why He created the earth. That's why He made the garden. So, He doesn't expect you to take a vow of poverty like some religions do, move into a monastery or do all that kind of stuff. What He expects is for you to understand the blessings you've received from Him and be generous then in that which He has given you in using it to advance His kingdom and His cause. And here's the thing. The more you see of God, the more you appreciate what He's done. The more you see of Him, the more you appreciate what He's done, the greater your giving is going to be. You know, I mean that's, and I'm not talking just about in money. I'm talking about in your time, in use of your talent, in anything. So I think to really think correctly about sacrificial giving is get our minds off of the externals into the heart. The externals take care of themselves as the heart develops and grows. And I've seen my giving grow over the years. You know, I mean, as I grow, the amount I give, the joy I get of doing what we're doing here tonight, you know, and the traveling and some of those kinds of things. Does that help any, Ann?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's key that what you just covered, these people gave themselves first.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, it says that in there. That's where it has to come from. It has to come first from our hearts. And you know, unfortunately, do you notice how easy it is for Christian people to gravitate toward externals, the things of the flesh, and neglect, and not just Christian people, even the Jews, Pharisees. What was their main stone? There was very little wrong with their external actions. Jesus commended them for it on a couple places. You know, he just says, that's great. But he says, man, you're inwardly, you're just you're just not worth anything. And so we have to realize that the heart is what is of most importance.
So Abel had more faith.
That's what Hebrews says. Yeah, in Hebrews, he by faith offered a more excellent sacrifice, which means that his sacrifice was given with a much better attitude than what Cain actually gave, and that's what set the stage. But if you look at all these places where God's blazing anger comes forth, it is because of a heart issue and not the external act itself. No, Moses didn't get to go into the promised land. You remember why? I mean, he was mad. The people had whined and just fussed, and I mean, just imagine how we get with two kids in the back seat trying to drive across state. Okay, imagine you're leading 3 million to 5 million people who's whining all the time, you know, and God's supplying everything they need all along the way, and they still whine, you know. And what was it? I remember my granddad. I never did understand this saying. Maybe somebody explained it to me. You'd cry if somebody's messed in your dinner plate. Well, yeah, that makes sense to me. But but have you ever heard that saying? They say you'd cry if somebody messed. Have you heard it? Yeah, he's back from where I'm from. You've heard it. You know? It's about somebody who complains all the time, you know. And anyway, but when Moses was standing there with his rod and they were whining again, Moses said, how long, you rebel? I mean, I can feel his anger. He said, how long, you rebel, shall I bear up with you? Smack! Bring forth water from this rock. And God had told him to speak to it. Now, God brought the water out. And then later he said, Moses, you're not entering in. He said, because before the people, I must be regarded as holy. I must be honored. And in that moment, your anger, and that's why the anger of man never works what? The righteousness of God, right? In that moment, your anger overrode, and your flesh took over, even though it's understandable. But that's just an illustration of how weak we are in our flesh. And it's an... Yes, right. And because it causes you to do things that you can't fix, you know. So, anyway, I hope that helped. And thank you, because you made me get in there and have to start looking. But
I went to the internet as well.
Did you?
I found one article, and the main thing that I took away from it was he said that, you know, so many people have so much debt, and we just commonly live beyond our means.
Right, we do.
And we're looking here, there, and everywhere to pull some money to get something else that we want to live beyond our means.
And in that case, we end up...
In the same way, we need to give
Right.
beyond our means.
Right, and you know he's correct. You know I have to counsel a lot of particularly young people, and myself in my younger years. I mean I see them making the same mistake I made as well, but you know I can remember when we got our first credit card. Worst mistake I ever made in my life. But we were at J.C. Penney's. We didn't even have kids yet. We were in the mall. Me and Marlana, her brother, and his wife, they'd come to visit for the weekend. We lived in the little apartment across the railroad tracks out by Brian Doyle Ballpark, Miss Doyle's house. Little 2-bedroom apartment, bath and kitchen, living room. Simple days. No TV. Didn't even have a phone. We had to walk down to the middle of Cave City and use a payphone. Check on things back home. We're 100 miles from everybody, so people come down to try to keep us from either killing each other. Maybe they thought that's what we'd do, or knew we were homesick because we didn't know anybody. I hadn't been here. We moved in July, and school didn't start till August, you know, and so it was. But actually, looking back on those times, I'm thinking, well, you talk about a simple little life. I was close to being Amish and wasn't Amish, you know. But we went down to the mall and we'd eaten out somewhere and we shopping. We went into J.C. Penney's and they had a little table set up. Get a Penney's card and you can get a free watch. Well, there was the devil's bait, wasn't it? We'll never use this, but I'm getting that free watch. Christmas rolled around a couple months later. Guess what we did? Bought Christmas presents from J.C. Penney's and put it on there. Then later, you know, well, I think I need a MasterCard. I travel a lot in case something happens. And then, you know, I mean, how many of us have been there? Then all of a sudden, here you sit, and you're saying, all my money I made this month's going to pay these credit card debts. And so by the time that you get them paid, you don't have nothing to do with anything, you know. And so I run into a lot of young couples who like me, they've come to it now, but here's where I'm at. Well, you got to meet your obligation there. I mean, you know, otherwise you're going to be in trouble. So I say you got to start learning to practice setting little amounts aside. But what I like in them is they see their mistake. You know, I've really caught myself in this, and I can't give what I want. I had a man tell me the other day, I want to give to Belize so bad, but my debt is so high, I can't. I'm trying to get it off. I sold my car and bought an older one. You know, so I mean, he's actually making things because he really now, God's put it on his heart, I want to be involved in that work. And he says, I can't because I have, and you know, and that's what Solomon warned us. He says the borrower becomes a servant to the lender. The lender becomes our controller, and boy, I felt that squeeze. And now that I'm getting old, I finally kind of got out from under it.
You know, the sad thing is, Sam, 90% of Americans today are living paycheck
Oh
to
yeah,
paycheck.
yeah. Easy credit is very bad.
And the sad thing is, it's as much as the people's fault as the government. And people is pushing it. They're pushing all this on people.
Well,
you know, you don't have to accept it.
no, that's just like nobody made me sign up for that J.C. Penney's card. I wanted that watch, and it wasn't a very good watch. You can imagine a free watch for signing up on a card. And I wore it for a month or two, and it fell apart, and then that was it.
I've had a J.C. Penney card since 1965.
I don't got one anymore.
No.
We did. And I tell you what was really bad. We one time cut all ours up and then went and got more. Show you how
That's the
stupid
worst
we
thing
are.
you can do. People say, well, if you cut all your cards up, pay everything off, you're going to be good. Then you're trying to get more debt.
What is it? Solomon also says the hand that wants is never what?
Satisfied.
Never satisfied. You know, and those who get riches, their needs increases with them. Isn't that something? Because you know have you ever got a big pay raise and you think, oh, look at all the extra money I'm going to have. I'm living on this much right now. Now I've got twice that much because I've been promoted. I should be sitting pretty. 6 months later, because all that happened was I raised my standard of living. I didn't stay at this standard down here. Got a little nicer car, bought a little newer home, put that furniture in the living. You know what I'm saying? So the next thing you know, you're still sitting there living hand to mouth, and that's chokes us. But anyway, those are all good points, and those are things that True Christians, I love to hear your questions because your question shows your concern. And your concern reflects your heart. Because otherwise, we'd be like the way that a lot of people are about their giving. A lot of Christians, listen, they just open up their wallet, first thing that's in there, and they just throw it in. I mean, you can tell it's not purposed. It's just, oh, here comes a collection plate. I got to give something in there. And I love God's way of dealing with us because, He wants us to serve out of appreciation for His holiness and glory. So He's not going to say, Sam, out of every $100, I want you to give 20. He's not going to say that. He wants me, out of love for Him, to make those decisions. And the more I love Him, the better my decisions will be as that goes on. Now, that doesn't mean He doesn't require giving, as we saw. He still requires us to pay to the government. That's what the tithe was, as we talked about in Israel. They were a theocracy, and they gave 10% to pay for the upkeep of their government, the Levites, who ran the nation. So
that's the problem too, that the government, every time you get a pay raise for those that draw any kind of disabilities or stuff, the government turns
they're watching.
back. Yeah.
They're watching.
They're getting more money out of it.
But here's the thing, I've been trying to learn not to grunt about it, because in that day
The money belongs to them.
they were a really bad government. I mean, Israel not only had their religious taxes, Rome was horrible to them. But Paul still told them, pay it. Render unto Caesar what Caesar's, tribute to whom tribute is due, honor to whom honor is due, custom to whom custom is due. Custom is those little taxes we pay all day long. You go fill up your car, you pay taxes. You know what I'm saying? It's built into the cost per gallon. That would be what we would call a custom. Where you go to the grocery store and you get that sales tax. That's a custom. Then you got your income tax, and so. But
You got the handling, and then you got the other stuff.
he tells us to do it, and that's what happens. Okay, 2 Corinthians chapter 8. So we've seen already then the principles that are associated with giving as modeled by the churches of Macedonia. And, the discussion we just had is a very important one. We're asking questions about, am I giving enough? Do I possess too much? Some people feel guilty for what they've got. Sometimes I was reading a comment by a man the other day. He said some people feel really guilty for what they have, and he said he thought maybe perhaps the guilt should better be directed as a lack of thankfulness for what we have. We need to get to the heart, not just because I've got this. Don't feel guilty over that. The Lord's blessed you. But are you thankful for that? Well, how do you know? Well, how you use it. That's a good gauge of it. Are you willing to use it? So this lesson is the next couple ones will be general, I guess, so to speak, and it's just the biblical view that people should have concerning money. And it's interesting to me that God has said as much about money in the Bible as He has about faith and prayer. Why? Because He knows that it is a great temptation, but He also knows it can be used as a great agency for good in a system He set up. He set up the economy, and so He's best equipped to tell us how to view our possessions. If you remember, John says that once we fail, this world turned against us, so all that is in the world, lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Of those three, the lust of the eyes generally deals with materialism, how you view the things that you can see, the things that you have, the things you can possess. And so that's an avenue of temptation. And so I think Jesus and God and the Holy Spirit speaks a lot about that so that this will not happen. So we've seen that Paul's commended the churches of Macedonia, and we know that they have given bountifully. In 2 Corinthians 8 verse 3 there, you see where he tells us that he testifies that according to their ability and beyond their ability, they gave of their own accord. So 2 Corinthians 8:3. And so that's one of the things that I see him doing in showing us just some of those principles, and he uses the Macedonians as a great example of that. We see that in 2 Corinthians 9:6, another way he states this same thing. This I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Verse 7, each one must do just as he's purposed in his heart, not grudgingly to under compulsion. So there he goes to the heart again. Verse 8 of chapter 9, why? God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that you always have sufficiency in everything. So God's promised to take care of us in those things. And we sow much, we'll reap much. But in whatever you sow, God's able to use it for his glory. In that verse 8 is really the harvest of your sowing and his sufficiency. He's the one who supplies, and he increases the harvest of righteousness. It makes sense to me, because if you're really thankful for God and you give to God and you further God's kingdom by what you give significantly, okay, then in turn, what do you think God's going to do? Withhold blessings from you? He's going to say, hey, I got a real winner here. Here's somebody who's really growing and thanking me and giving more. So, you know, I mean, if I've got, you remember the one talent man, right? I mean, you know, you look at it, did he do anything wrong? No. He still had what the master had given, right? He took it out and hid it. So he didn't go waste it on alcohol or women or gambling or any of those kinds of things. He still had possession of it. He was not so much in trouble for what he had as he was for what he didn't do with what he had. You know, he just kept it there. And, you know, unfortunately, there's even churches that have that philosophy.
Amen.
I know some that sit on thousands and thousands of dollars that I don't know what they're waiting to do. Hand Jesus a savings bond, I guess, when he returns.
But you know, Sam, that goes back to the conversation you and I had in reference to that about, you know, the fact of giving. But, you know, just like in the church, I don't know if some of y'all remember back when, and I brought this up before, but when Tammy Faye and the Billy Swaggers wanted all those millions of dollars, you know, and then when I first started coming here, that was my biggest problem with giving, because I used to think, you know, why should I give my hard-earned money and all the church is going to do is blow the money?
Mm-hmm.
But Sam told me something, and thank you for helping me with that, Sam, but that was something that I should have cleared up, because honestly, that's between them and God. That's not on me.
Right.
I shouldn't be setting my gift and my giving based on that, because that's between them and God. So since you've explained that, now my heart's a lot clearer now.
Well, you know, and I was just getting ready to talk about the prosperity gospel we hear on TBN, and I think you ever hear them talk about sow the seed of faith, and that usually means sow a seed to me. Okay, Oral Roberts was really good about that, and some of those guys on TV, they'll say they take your seed and you put it in the ground, and it brings forth a great harvest. And you know, they're right, and the Bible uses that. But let me show you how they've twisted it. Look in 2 Corinthians 9 and verse 9. Verse 8, let's start with verse 8. And God is able to make all grace abound to you, so that always having all sufficiency in everything, you may have an abundance for every good deed. So see there, he just says God will give you an abundance if you give properly. He says, as it is written, he scattered abroad, he gave to the poor, his righteousness endures forever. Now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. So that's what they're saying. You sow, Oral Roberts now, he's dead. You sow a seed into Sam Dick Ministries, and you will have so much money, you know, you won't have to worry ever again. God will multiply that. Now, they're right up to a point. Why does God multiply that? What did these verses just say? So I would become a rich man? So that you may have an abundance at the end of verse 8 for what? Every good work. Oh, now that ain't quite the way they tell that, is it? Send it to me so you'll have a lot. No, send it to me so you'll have a lot to send to other places to help even more. You see the difference? They make it about you having the abundance. The Bible uses the sower and the seed about having an abundance for what? Good works. And he says it again, now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for you will supply and multiply your seed for sowing. See, they end there. But he says, and increase the harvest of your what? Righteousness, your righteous deeds. So here's the true principle of that. Sow your seed in God's work. God will bless your efforts, and you will have more. You will have an abundance to sow more seed where? Into God's work. He didn't say, sow some seed into God's work so you'll have more to put in your bank account.
So many people wish that.
I know it. Well, but that shows you, and I fuss, we fuss at those preachers. But listen, the people who do it are the greedy ones. Why are they sending it to them? Right? I mean, that works both ways. The preachers want to be rich, and they are too, and they think they got a way of scratching each other's back. So, the seed of faith is in Scripture. But the harvest is different from what the prosperity preachers say and what the gospel says. The Scripture says it will bring forth a harvest for you to sow more righteousness. So you'll have more seed for more good works. They say, so you'll have more seed. And stop. There's a big difference there. Isn't Satan slick? And so you're sitting there. And then these guys, of course, prey on folks. I heard one of them on TV one time talking about, he said, my dear old daddy, he had come out of, this is the preacher talking about his daddy, he fleeced his own daddy. Okay? If it really happened. But the story went, Daddy had just had an operation, and he was left with $40,000, $50,000 worth of unpaid medical bills. He was already retired, little pension, savings were all gone. And he said, son, I don't know what I'm going to do. They're wanting to take my house. I mean, he was feeling this, and everybody sitting in the audience going, wonder how this is going to turn out. And he said, son, they're going to take my house. Of course, his son sitting there, one of them preachers that had a jet. So I don't know why didn't his son just pay off the $50,000. But that wouldn't have worked in this story. So his dad said, I don't know what I'm going to do. We're going to lose everything we've ever had, and we ain't had much. And he said, you know what I told Daddy? Step out in faith. How much you have in the bank? He said, I got $300 till I get my pension next month. He said, let me have it, Daddy. Let me have it. He said, all of it? He said, yes. Step out in faith. The Lord will bless that seed of faith. Now, I don't know if he really fleeced his own. Probably did. I wouldn't be surprised. Anyway, he said, so my dad wrote out the check for $300, and I took it. He said, the next morning, the hospital called and said, every now and then we by lottery pull a man's name and forgive their debt. We're forgiving you all your debt that you owe us. And he said, my dad rung my office and said, it works, son, it really works. And then, they had these things set up like a telethon. Phones started ringing off the hooks over there. You know what I'm saying? Why, everybody said, well, if it worked that way, I'll do that too. See, I mean, this. So, I don't know.
Just started going on.
Yeah, that's just the way that they do it. But anyway, So, but it does just keep expanding. Then if you'll notice down there in chapter 9, verse 11, he says, you will be rich in everything. Oh, that's the words we wanted to hear, wasn't it? We'll be rich in what? Everything. Well, read the rest of the verse, though.
For all liberality.
So you can then be liberal in your giving. Nowhere is God just going to make you rich.
He says, which causes thanksgiving through us to God.
Right. So we get, so we can give, so God can be praised for it. But see, you see how people can butcher a verse and just kind of take it? So those principles are everywhere. So the question then becomes, if your heart is right, when you ask how much do you want, how much do I give, ask how much do you want to be a part of the work of God. Because that will impact how much that you have. How much do you want to sow with God? Lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. How much blessings do you want? How much investments, both spiritually, are you willing to make? Now, we all learn that giving is really fraught with difficulty. It really is, because we live in a world where money makes it go around, right?
Amen.
I mean, to a certain extent. The house over your head, the car you drove here in tonight, the clothes on your back, food in your stomach. So we really have a lot of problems with the world that we live in. It's fallen us. The reason being, one we've talked about earlier, is the world sucks up so much of our money that we don't have an amount that we should be giving, because we've spent it on we've allocated it on ourselves. And you do not, by the way, forego your debt. Owe no man anything, nothing. He said, so you need to pay that. You can't say, well, the Jews actually had a tradition. You remember that one passage where it says, Jesus said, he says, you neglect the commandments of God by your traditions. They were getting on him for neglecting the traditions. And he says, you have father and mother, and you say, Korbana, it is a gift. Do you know what that means? You know how that plays out? Here was their thing. If the Jewish system was, if you have children and you get to where you can't work as a father or mother, they need to requite you, which means repay you. You take care of them. Okay? They all had extended family. That's the way it was when I grew up. My great-granddaddy lived with my grandmother. He was crippled. He had his own room. She took care of him. And that's just the way it was when we grew up. You don't see a lot of that today, but that was the way it did. Your kids and grandkids and everybody pitched in, took care of the old folks, and we all lived on the same street and all that kind of stuff. So when it came time, it'd be like me going to my daughters now and saying, I can't take care of myself. I'm going to have to live with you. They could say, Korbana, it is a gift. Do you know what they meant? I would, but I have given all my money to the temple. Because God outweighs man, right? That's the way they were looking at it. So my obligation to God's greater than my obligation to you, so therefore I'm sorry, Mom, Pop, you're going to have to get by best you can, because I can't help you. I'm giving all my money to God. But here was the kicker. They didn't really have to give it all to God. They just had to say it. And so when they told Jesus, your disciples transgress the traditions of our fathers by not washing their hands. He says, and you people make the word of God of none effect by transgressing his commands. He said, we ain't even in the same ballpark here. You're talking about a custom. I'm talking about the commands, and that's the one he brought up. They didn't like Jesus very much. You know why, don't you? Because he would just call them on it. And there was nothing that they could do about it. So the world then sucks up a lot of it, and we get in a bad shape. But we need to pay the world back. Don't get back in that shape again. Fix the problem. The world even, and that's what it wants. It wants your money. Advertising. Why do you think a company would pay multi-millions of dollars to have a 30-second spot on the Super Bowl? Do you think they do that because they don't get anything out of that? They may pay $40 million for that 30-second spot. So what's that tell you? How much more than that are they going to get?
Triple that out of it.
Because the advertising things are just what they are, hooks, to make it look cool, look great, and make you want it. And, it's funny. You can forget the shows you watch,
Remember the commercials?
but you'll remember the commercials.
Yes.
I can sit back and think about commercials way back. Do you remember? Let's see, one just came to my mind then when I was thinking of that. Maybe
I
I'm
wish
hungry.
there was a Dr. Miles.
Yeah, I can remember that. You remember the one where they run in and who got chocolate in my peanut butter? You remember that, where the two people would be walking down the street and one of them have a chocolate bar and another jar of peanut butter and one would stick in there, and they'd both look and they'd both take it out and say, let's see, buy Reese's peanut butter cup. I can still see that. Rice-A-Roni, San Francisco treat. You see, our minds are flooded with that, and that was when I was 6 years old. I mean,
What about the,
Cavities.
do what? Yeah, no cavities. Right.
what about that white flour?
Yeah. Or
Another flour.
what was the other one? Give it to Mikey. He'll eat anything.
Yes, right.
What's that?
Beef.
Where's the meat?
Yeah, where's the beef? And what was it? Even the jingles, hold the pickles, hold the lettuce, special orders, don't upset us. All we ask is that you let us have it your way. And you remember that? You know who wrote that jingle? That was what he was doing before he became a pop star. Barry Manilow. He was a jingle writer. And when they came out with the song Mandy, it was actually Brandy, and it was a rock hit.
Yep.
But there was this guy, they got guys in music who only try to match musicians to songs. He said, what if we slow the song down, change its name from Brandy to Mandy, and I know a jingle writer who can really sing this. He went and got Barry Manilow, and phew, and the rest was history.
Number one hit.
Yeah, right, that was it. But anyway, the world wants your money. And so that's the first front that causes a problem. The second one is, to get your money, the world will also let you buy on credit. Right? They will let you buy on credit. So we buy things without money up front. We're not buying things without money. They're going to get it. Okay? And, it sinks us into debt, and then that debt limits our giving. So we buy beyond our means, buy things we don't need because advertising's hooked us. So I spend a lot of my money buying stuff that... You ever bought something you really thought you wanted because it looked good on an ad and you got it and you think, why in the world did I ever buy this stupid thing? It wasn't near as neat as what you thought it was going to be. But advertising did its work. Then the other thing then is this. So this twofold problem then, right? That limits my little circle of pot of money that I get each month goes way down because of that. And that causes a lot of problems. In fact, marriage statistics say that money is more a problem than affairs. Usually the money is what leads to the affairs. Couples have money problems and they fight about it. So, you're not fighting with the lady at work or with the man at work. Why? Because y'all ain't having to fork out money matters. So everything seems hunky-dory, so you finally leave that one, go marry that other one, and now you got your money pooled, and guess what you're going to start fighting about there? Money. It's just...
The sad thing is, though, you have those that are material people before they even get married. They'll either be the husband or the wife. I mean, there's people just love material things.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, there's, and young people don't look at that. You don't look at the person. You don't look for the right things when you're dating. You ever notice that? You don't look for temperament. You don't look at their interests, or are they extravagant, And then once you get into it and committed, you're sitting there saying, maybe I should have paid more attention. I always tell people now, I tell young men, if you want to know what your wife's going to be in 30 years, look at your mother-in-law. If you can see them married to her, if you could be married to her, go for it. I'm just kidding. Before I get cards and letters from mothers-in-law. Even my own mother-in-law.
Say, look what his daddy looks like. You marry his daddy, you'd be all right too. And I said,
Yeah.
well, you in trouble?
Well, they always say women should look at the husband's who?
Father.
Mother.
Oh, mother, yeah.
Yeah, not to, they look at the husband's mother. And Marlene always says, of course, I stayed with my grandmother for many years.
She didn't look at the grandmother. She
Looked at my mother and she thought it was going to be great. She said, I should have looked at your grandmother. That was where I'd have figured this out. But anyway, and so, really, studies have actually shown 50% of our time of thoughts are usually spent on money issues. In some of the studies that they do. How to get it, how to spend it, how to save it, how to earn it, how to invest it, how to borrow it, how to find it. And it does. It occupies for a lot of people a lot of time and money. We live in an indulgent, materialistic culture, and it just takes a toll on our giving. It keeps us from giving what we'd want to do. And it's not only the external world that does that, but even churches.
Yep.
We mentioned that a moment ago. The Christian world leaders are always begging you to get PTL Club. Remember the Praise the Lord Club? The Joel Osteens. TBN. Yeah. Well, 700 Club. Voltaire, you remember him if you can go back to your school days, was a French atheistic philosopher. And he was there when Protestantism tried to get a toehold in France, which it never did much. France killed all of them. But when it was going on in the wars, he said basically, Protestantism is a less expensive substitute for Catholicism. He said they're cut out of the same fabric. He said one just as less showy than the others was basically what he was saying. And this type of exploitation can even go into a local churches. I get things all the time in the mail, companies that say, let us help you with a profit raising thing at your church.
Pushing money.
Fundraisers. How we can do it. And I thought, well, God gave me a fundraiser. Let every one of you lay by himself in store on the first day of the week. I mean, that's the fundraiser, right?
And they push the bake sales.
And then, and then on top of that, we have churches that are filled with people who really do not love the kingdom. We've one of the things I was never taught growing up was that in the church there are tares. And what I mean by tares are people who have attached themselves to the church. They look like Christians. They try to act like Christians, but inside they're really not what? Christians. They have veneer. And that was brilliant. What Satan loved to do. If I was going to cause disruptions in the church, I would try it from outside forces. But where would I really be the most successful?
Inside.
From the inside. The Trojan horse, right? Move them right inside. And so, over the years I've come in contact with people that it was very obvious that they had been baptized. They took the Lord's Supper every Sunday. They came to church every Sunday. But man, their lives showed no fruit. And how did Jesus say you identify us?
By the fruit they bear.
By the fruit. So if there's no fruit, you got problems to worry about there. Right? And so that's one of the things that we have to look at. So people don't give what they ought because they for a bunch of different reasons. Some are not really that into the Lord's work. And then you've got Satan confusing us on wealth. Those who think that we are it's wrong to be wealthy. We can't have any wealth. We ought to cater to the rich. You remember James talking about partiality to the rich? A rich man comes in. We all want to, do you know who he is? Do you know who he is? Do you know how much he's got? He needs to sit over here. And then the poor man, we push over there in the back somewhere. Then there's the thing that they actually put on preachers. preach what, you know, a lot of local congregations do this. You want to preach here? You want to have a nice house? You want a nice salary? Well, then here's what you need to preach. Okay? And, you know, one of the things that I can say I have been so blessed with, though it's been a heartache because it made it hard, but I understand why it didn't, or why it worked best for me not to. I have never taken a salary from a church, period. I have been supported by churches, but there is a difference. They support the work I do. But they could all cut it off today and I will not miss a payment. You know what I'm saying? So, when I hit a pulpit, they ain't dancing around in my mind as, well, this is a pretty hard subject here. Will they fire me? And if they do, well, how will I pay my bills at the end of the month? Ain't a worry. I would love to say I would be that way if they were paying me. But I know myself. That would be a hard temptation. I mean, you know, like if you just think about it. Your whole livelihood is depending on those people sitting in the pew. Right? And they're going to give you, you know, they're paying for your house, they're paying, you know, and the money you get is buying food and clothes for your children and your wife and all that stuff. And you know, all of a sudden you're going to, this verse happens to hit the biggest giver that we have. So what are you going to do there? You can't tell me that pressure would not be felt. Now, I'm not saying everybody would fold. But I'm just glad I never put myself open to that temptation, or the Lord didn't let me get into that temptation. That don't say much for me, though, does it? He probably didn't say I would fold. So, you know, it's, you know, if they tell me to go home tomorrow, you know, it'd break my heart, but I ain't going to go hungry. And so that way I was never beholden. Paul did that with 1 Corinthians, in 1 Corinthians, if you remember. He said, I hadn't taken nothing from you. Good thing, because you can see how they did him. He said, but I didn't. So he was free to do that. Churches, you know, churches even borrow money for a whole lot of things that, and of course you all know, you fuss at me. I'm not a whole lot on aesthetics. We got a sign that really needs to be replaced. It's not that I'm stupid and don't know there's a sign that needs to be replaced. But I also know a girl in Belize that's in horrible shape.
Amen.
And I don't want to pay $800 when I can help pay a bill off in Belize to help a girl that's in horrible shape. We got another one on the wall you can read. you know what I'm saying? But you know, and I love massive cathedrals. There is nothing more beautiful
Yes.
than those in Europe.
Yes.
And you know, they actually built those with intent. You know, when you walk in, the highness of them, if you've ever been in one, that was for the purpose of God's vastness, His highness, His loftiness, His exaltation. And it does give you a sense of that. And then, you know, you look at the paintings. I used to think they just liked art, but some of that art ain't really good. Two-dimensional, one-dimensional, stick figure. But then there was a practical reason for that. The people couldn't read, so they read the stories in picture form. That was what they were doing. And but to build some of those today would cost millions upon millions. And I just think that that's a waste of the money. That's not furthering the kingdom. That don't get me wrong. If our air conditioner tears up, I'm gonna get us an air conditioner. We put a roof on the building a couple of weeks ago because we were leaking. Well, it wasn't leaking yet, but the shingles were coming off, and I didn't want the building to fall down. We got to have a place to wash them. So don't get me wrong. I'm not saying if you come here, we're going to end up under the tree eventually one day. But our sign might fall down. But anyway, but you know, and they sometimes create unpayable debt. I've been to places where churches have built huge buildings that'll hold 1,000 people and they only have 300 members. Way overbuilt. You know, build one where you can expand if you need to. But you got 300 members, and so now you got 700 empty seats. Do you know what that does to the mind? Do you know what a small building with just a few people does to the mind? We ought to. You come here. Sometimes you think, you're standing room only, right? Because every pew's full. Gives you the idea. One night I was watching Andy Griffith, and the preacher was up there preaching, and it panned the audience, you know. Count the number of people there. You would think he was in a congregation of 200 people, but you actually count, there ain't but like 15 people sitting back through there. But you know, they got them squeezed in, all in the same thing, filling up each pew, so it gave everybody the impression you got a real big group. But you know, we gravitate toward those kinds of things. That's just what the flesh does. So go ahead.
And sorry, excuse me if you heard what you're saying, but the one thing that I'll chime in on that as far as our little congregation is, to me, I would love to be in a bigger congregation, but I tell you what, we have such a good family here, and there's so much love felt within this church. You know,
Well,
I don't think we'd have the same feeling if we were in a larger group, because we just don't feel it.
I have read a lot about the research that's done on church growth and successful churches. The bigger the church, the less effective in building relationships.
Yes.
The smaller the church, the less revenue for being involved in bigger missionaries. And so I was reading the other day that actually some of the most effective churches are somewhere between 60 and 80 in membership. You know, that's small enough where everybody knows everybody. You got 80 people, so the offering's going to be a little bit better than it is if you got 15, you know. And so you kind of get the best of both worlds. But they say those churches can really do a lot. But anyway.
It's like the one Lost River, Church of Christ down there.
Do what?
The Lost River.
Yeah.
Lost
Uh-huh.
River,
Mhm.
Church
Yeah, I know what you're talking
Church
about.
of Christ down Dishman Lane.
Mhm.
It was humongous. Humongous.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. You know, and if you fill them up, I ain't got a problem with that. If you need 1,000 seats, build 1,000 seat building. You know.
But it's, you know.
Now, let me say what we're not saying. We are not saying that there's not a place for saving, planning, and meeting your needs. God does not. In fact, you know, you're told to save. You're told to plan. You know, in everything you do. You're criticized if you don't meet your needs. And you know, it's just like, if you want to know, does God expect people to plan? What did he do with Pharaoh and Joseph when the famine was getting ready to hit hit Egypt? You know, God was not only taking care of Pharaoh, he was taking care of all the nations, because Egypt was the granary of the world. And so one of the things that he did, God gave him a plan, didn't he? And it was a plan over time. And that plan over time incorporated what? Saving. You know, you get your crop in, put 20% of it up. Spend the 80. Next year, 20% of it up. So that when that famine hits, you'll have that percentage to pull you through. And not only for Egypt, that was for the other, because that's how Joseph and them got down there. You know, his father and them, they sent down there because they were starving. They said, we know Egypt's got grain. They didn't know that why Egypt had grain was because of the little brother they had sold and thought was dead at this point in time. Wasn't that a surprising shock? But so we need to understand the how, the what, the where, the motives, and the consequences of giving. So we're going to look at some points. Now, I'm going to go ahead and introduce one or two tonight. The first one is the morality of money. Okay? We should always be, can we doing all right on time, Ryan? Okay, the morality of money. And here's the first thing I want you to know about it. Money is neither moral nor immoral. Money itself is neither good nor bad. I can set this bottle of eye drops here, and I cannot assign to it a good or bad in a sense of morality. Why? Because it's a thing. And if I lay a $50 bill out here, same thing's true of that $50 bill. It's not good, and it's not bad in and of itself. You know, that's not the issue. It's neutral. But second thing under this heading of morality of money, the first one is it's neutral, is to realize that it is a measure of morality. Your morality. What I do with that $50 will tell you a whole lot about me, won't it? You know, because we know that money is central to everyday living. And let me give you just a little exercise. Because sometimes even we don't know ourselves as much as we think that we do. But sometimes get your checkbook or your debit card statement over a month, maybe over the last 6 months. Go through it, see where all your money's gone. Okay, you know it's gone, but I'm saying look at what you spent it on. It'll tell you a lot about you, won't it? It'll tell you a lot about you. And sometimes we maybe need that to, because you know we do some things so gradually. Sometimes we don't realize. I mean, I'm sure the amount of money spent on eating out in our bunch would be humongous, because everybody works and it's just easier to run to a restaurant and pick it up. By the way, only half of half can now get in the restaurants, I think, starting Tuesday or something. Yeah. If it's such a dire need, why don't we start it today? Why do we have to wait till next Tuesday or something? I'm politicizing again. I ain't supposed to talk bad about those in power. But it does measure your morality to some degree. If you see, well, look at these bills. I went to the liquor store 14 times last month. Oh, and there's that $2,000 bill down at the gambling boat. You know, so all of a sudden you're starting to see, oh. Anyway, so money's amoral, but it does reveal our priorities. And then, you know, while you're doing that, look and see how much was spent on spiritual endeavors.
Ouch.
You know, see how much you actually spent. Not just giving to the church, but helping somebody, you know, doing something, buying a book that was spiritual or whatever. But money itself is not the issue. Some people have money and are not corrupt because they allow the money to manifest their righteousness. They're always doing something good with it. You know, I know people that way. So money is not the problem. Some have thought it is, and some have even said it's wrong to be rich, but that's not scriptural. Abraham was rich. Job was rich. Solomon was rich. David was rich. There's many of them that had money. But all of those guys had this in common. God was first, not their riches. And so because of that, it was not an issue for them. So the Bible doesn't forbid you to have anything, you know, to have something or to possess money. Deuteronomy and Haggai, the prophet, they both say everything is God's. So really what you got that you call yours is not really technically what?
Yours. It's God's.
It ain't yours. Because if you drop dead right now, it's still here. You're not. It is. So it's not yours. The Egyptians had a problem with that. They'd build the pyramids and put all their stuff in there thinking they was going to take it over, didn't they? And then 3,000 years later, here come the Yankees, and we tear into the pyramids and take all their stuff.
They're still finding stuff.
That's right. So it does not forbid us to have that. We all have gifts, mental capacity, physical gifts, and some people have wealth as a gift. You know, God made them wealthy. And I'm glad I know some of them, because there's men right now, I know 2 or 3 that I could call and say, I need $10,000 for an emergency in Belize, and I'd have it in the morning. Okay? Now, they couldn't call me and ask for that. I ain't got it. But they do. And they would be the type that wouldn't even ask why. You know, I wouldn't have to coax. into doing that. Some people are born with high standing, some people are born low. But now keep in mind, wherever you are economically, in your economic social structure, low, middle, high, social class, rich, wealthy, poor, moderate, whatever your term you classify yourself as, you're there not by time and chance, under God's sovereignty. He dispenses as he sees fit his gifts. Right? You know, the eye can't sit around and whine because it's not the nose. So the person who has little means ought not to sit around and whine against those who have a lot. Okay? And those who have a lot ought not to look down on those who have a little. But God has a plan, and he uses the poor as well as the rich. In fact, one of the things that I find in Scripture is he favors the poor. He likes to use the poor. Why? Well, there is power in weakness. The power is that God is glorified by our weakness. The weaker you are, the more he's seen in whatever you do. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
The weaker you are, the more he's seen in whatever you do. So everything is then God's. The distribution of wealth is in his providence and in his purpose. Sometimes I look at it and it don't make sense to me. But you know what? I'm not near arrogant now like I used to be, that I could sit in judgment in God. I'm going to say, but your way must be right. I would have it all messed up. He's given some people he's given us all the power to get a certain amount of wealth, but never forget that while you have the power to get it, the wealth comes from him as well as the power to obtain it.
Power is his, right.
And he wants us to see it as a stewardship. And a stewardship means I'm just entrusted with another man's goods. You know, I've done that before, and I've actually accepted a stewardship or two. I don't like to do it for people. But, you know, it'd be like if I'm sitting here and saying, well, I'm going on vacation next week. There won't be nobody at the house. Got 2 dogs. Ryan, do you care to check on the house, make sure the air conditioner's operating, and the dryer don't catch on fire, and the washer don't explode, and I come home to water all over the place, and my dogs are fed and watered, and that kind of stuff? If he says yes, he's now assumed what? Responsibility. Will there be a day of accounting? Yes. When I come back from that trip, I will go in and see what has Ryan done. And I can remember one time when I was in college, I was afraid I was going to fail my physics class, but actually ended up with an A. But I was taking physics, and I'd done something really stupid. I took 10 hours of physics in a summer term. They actually had an accelerated program, and I wanted to get those 10 hours over because I was a chemistry guy. In physics, I just had to have 10 hours of physics. And I seen this. Physics, I taught it, but I hated it. And so 10 hours in the summer, got 8 weeks to cover what's really 2 years of physics. Okay, and they're going to compress. So we went from 8 to 5 every day, breaking for lunch, to do this physics. Well, my physics professor in the second course liked me for some reason. Well, at the end of that class, he and his family were going on vacation to Florida. He said, you're still here, will you take the keys and stay at my house the week we're gone? And I have a pool out back, and will you keep everything in good shape? And I said yes. And I did really good, except I could not control the algae in the pool. So when he came back, it looked like a pond.
Oh.
And I felt really bad. He didn't get too mad. But I had already gotten my grade, so he couldn't do nothing to me. But the fact is, I wished at that point I had not become a steward for what he had done. And but you know, I knew that day of reckoning was coming. Man, I hated the greener the water got, the worse I hated the day he was going to show up. Judgment Day was on its way. But God's gifts are intended for our good. He knows we need food. He likes for you to ask for your daily needs, doesn't he? But let me ask you a question. Does he not know already what you have need of? He said he did, didn't he? See, prayer's not for him. A lot of people think, I got to talk God into this. Hey, you ain't talking God into nothing. God's wanting you to figure out what he's up to. Besides, just like that commercial with that guy at the hearing aid. And his son says something to him. You seen that when his son says, I love you. And he says, huh? And he said, I said, I love you. He said, I heard you the first time. I just wanted to hear you say it again. You know, that's kind of the way I think that God is. So God gives it to us, and he wants us to use it beneficially and for his glory and for our good, except that we're fallen creatures, and so therefore we pervert it.
I think one of the other things that we missed the boat on in that same aspect, Sam, is that, I know speaking primarily for myself, we don't give God thanks enough for what he's blessed us with also.
Right. Oh, yeah.
So the flip side of that, it's good to be thankful that you got what you got. But you also
Well, one of the best expressions of thankfulness is what you do with it.
Right.
Look at 1 Timothy 6 and 17, and then we'll kind of stop there and pick up there next time. But look at what he says there. 1 Timothy 6, verse 17. Instruct those who are rich in this present world, not to be conceited. So don't high-minded. Don't think of yourself better than others because you got more than what they have. Or to fix your hope on the uncertainty of riches, but on God, who richly supplies us with all things to enjoy. Who gives you what you got? For what purpose?
To enjoy.
To enjoy. He don't want you to think that there's some kind of pleasure he gets out of you being a want all the time. Okay? No. He just wants you to make sure that you do good. Look at verse 18. Instruct them to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share. You know, one of the things, too, I think, is we need to understand the relativity of the word poor. What do we mean by that? Well, you know, you compare me to Donald Trump, who's a billionaire. I'm what?
Poor.
Really, really poor. You know.
In that case.
Compare me to the mother who has no husband with 8 children living in a hotel room in one of these hotels here.
You're rich.
What am I?
Rich.
Compare her, at least who has a hotel room, to a homeless person living under a bridge with no food. She's rich, right? So see, that word's movable. Okay? And most of the time, in biblical terms, the poor are those who don't know where the next meal's going to come. You know what I'm saying? I'm eating right now, but I can't worry about supper, because I'll deal with it when I get there. Now, in that sense, I don't know no poor people. I know people who have less than I have.
Yes. Amen.
You know, it's just like the people in Belize. Fidel told me one time, he said, you know, we are not poor people. He says, we have less than what you all have. He said, but I have a house over my head. He said, we eat 3 meals a day. I have corn growing in my field. He said, in this jungle there is all kinds of food. And he said, in my garden I have fruit, cacao, and all the things he's saying. So he said, so while I have less than you, Brother Sam, he said, I am not a poor man. He said, the people of Belize are very rich. See, that's a proper view.
And I think
of
rich
that.
in that case is probably, to them, is viewed as a whole lot better.
Well, see, when we look at it, they have less than we have. And it's different than what we have. But that doesn't make them poor in and of itself. So relatively speaking, among themselves over there, they've survived for thousands of years on what they've got. Now you get into Africa, some places, it's not the case. Because there are famines, there's no food. They may go 2-3 days not knowing what they're going to eat. And some actually die of starvation. So you see there's places where that happens. So now you're getting into real poverty. But, but the poor are always here. Let's ask the Lord to bless our study. Father, we thank you so much for this evening, for the study that we've had. Help us as we look at the model of giving, as we consider the view of our material goods that you have so richly blessed us with. May we always understand the need for using them for your glory. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen and amen.